Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu to some of you and peace to the rest of you. This is Blackheart signing back in. On May 6th, yesterday, BGS IBMOR recorded "If You Out, You Out," the Communitah. And then the live stream was a follow-up to that, was actually pretty good. I need to listen to the rest of it. And I'm looking forward to learning more actually from BGS. I've learned from Obsidian. And I'm looking forward to learning more from BGS. He's older than both of us, and I know he knows more from a historical context. And that information is invaluable. So, BGS, thank you a million for the historical stats you brought us in previous clips and videos. I started learning from them about a year ago. You, Angry Man, and Obsidian, and some others whose names I can't recall right now have taught me quite a good bit. Mr. Anderson has taught me a good bit, Edward Anderson. I've learned things from Don Calypso when he's not creating content. So I'm learning so much more and realizing a lot of what I'd been through that I didn't understand at the time I had to go through it. At the beginning of the video, BGS showed a scene from Sophie's Choice. And honestly, the scene traumatized me, and I couldn't sleep well last night because of it. I'm at home now, and I need to be sleeping, and I still can't, because if I try to sleep, I'm going to hear the cries of that daughter that was traumatized as she was carried away from her mom and brother. This is not his fault. I don't think he knew that I would go through this sort of trauma. When he posted, he was merely illustrating a point, and he did. It was a very good point. You see, the Nazis were the real subhuman animals, and I wish that the Jews had exterminated them first. I can't get over what the Nazis did, because they learned from the USA, and we know what they did to us. And frankly, Southern white overseers and a few psychotic slave owners taught the Nazis, even though they didn't mean to. And eugenicists taught Hitler. So anyway, the point here is that in the video, he's right. If you out, you out, but they won't let you out. See, elite communities will kick you out. They'll expel you. You can leave them, because few would want to. Someone can stand up to an elite community for doing others wrong and be expelled unwillingly. But if you decide to leave a community of the oppressed, you can't. The oppressors will identify you, and they'll keep you there. See, guards can leave a prison and go home, but inmates live in the prison. Inmates can be mistreated and disrespected by other inmates, but they can't become guards. And frankly, if one could, would that not be a clear sign to you that this inmate sold you out? Or if you could, would it not be a clear sign to the other inmates that you sold out? Slaves don't just decide one day they aren't slaves anymore. And we're still seen as slaves to this day. If one slave gets rank over other slaves, we know that he or she is a sellout for accepting the position. You don't get acceptance from your oppressors, and you shouldn't want it. So that precludes this idea of leaving the Communitah and then never being a part of it again, although the observations are still correct about some of us acting like park apes, about us pushing each other, trying to push people out of the Communitah. So what about neutral parties? We can't escape from going to the oppressor's community, and I don't want us to. But what about neutral parties, though? Like an example would be the escaped slaves that ran from plantations and went to Mexico, or they hid out with original American tribes. They could live in these areas, but they were always different. They're citizens of Mexico to this day that are black. Some have been in Mexico since the arrival from Africa, and others descend from those who escaped from the USA and got to Mexico more easily. Well, I say to us the same thing I say to the Arabs that call themselves white and think they can make it and be accepted by white folk. You ain't white and they won't accept you. And no one closer to white folks than we are is going to accept us, especially in large numbers. See, there are black Arabs, even on African soil, and they aren't treated like the paler Arabs are. When a white person wears Arab clothing and learns Arabic, he or she is lauded for it. When a black person does it, he or she is just doing what he's supposed to do. Now, when a black non-Arab does it, he's approved of, and if he doesn't, he's encouraged to imitate the Arabs. Oftentimes, black non-Arabs are judged as good Muslims by doing what the Arabs do, even though being an Arab is different from being a Muslim. And even though, frankly, to tell the truth, Arab culture is very un-Islamic. So I'm using Arabs as an example to teach you something. In Arab countries, there are black folks, even men who straighten their hair, but no one with straight hair ever curls their hair, at least not in public. One black Arab woman was discussing marriage with me, and she said that she was willing to wear blue contacts and dye her hair blonde for me. I asked her if blonde women with blue eyes ever wore darker contact lenses and dyed their hair dark, and she said no, it's unheard of unless she's trying to hide from the cops. You see what I'm getting? What I'm telling you is that, frankly, black people are universally singled out, even by people who don't hate us at all. Arabs don't have the idea to discriminate against us in the job market. Arabs don't comprehend why real white folks used to lynch us, because they don't have a desire to kill us or even the idea to do so. Arabs wouldn't pull us over more and ticket us more highly, nor would they sentence us to longer sentences for the same crimes. Yet and still, they just take it for granted that they're not black, that they are white, and that we're less attractive than every other group of people, period. They take it for granted that the darker and the more dominant the features, the uglier the individual. They take for granted that black women have excellent bodies, but are ugly, even those who have never seen black women in person, and only gorgeous ones on TV. They still make that assumption. When black people live in China, they usually don't get attacked, but it does happen. Same thing in India. But in Africa, no one's grabbing Chinese or Indians and beating them until they're black, like we should do. One Chinese man told a Kenyan living in China that if Africans really didn't like being attacked in China, then they would attack the Chinese in Africa in retaliation and teach the Chinese a lesson. A Chinese man said this to a Kenyan living in China. In the end, everyone else can mix with each other. But when you're black, despite other women wanting certain things from black men, and even certain men wanting certain things from black women in a marriage or just for a roll in the hay, the fact is grandparents aren't ready for their grandchildren to go back to a closer resemblance to Adam and Eve than what they have evolved to lose. In the end, we're always distinct and we stand out from the crowd. We can't hide, and we can't expect a full acceptance even if discrimination is outlawed and enforced against in the jurisdiction. This is real. Our distinction from everyone is real. We are a unique people. Geneticists years ago, and I'm talking just 6 years ago, could not tell with any certainty what somebody's origin was except for two things. They could look at DNA and they could know with 100% certainty somebody was sub-Saharan African or not. Within sub-Saharan Africa, they couldn't tell which group with any certainty. And without sub-Saharan Africa, they couldn't be sure. But they could look and be sure with no doubt, this person's sub-Saharan African, this person's not. And this is a female, this is a male, due to the shape of the chromosomes. We're different. Yet and still, the black community is in bad shape, and we can't leave it as it is, even though we can't leave it altogether. So what is the solution, or the solution, as I like to call it? It's not to try to get into white communities or even other non-white communities either, because frankly, other non-white communities might treat us well, or they may not, it depends. But white communities are dangerous anyway, and I do not want us blending into them, because they're psychotic. Only they could produce a Hitler. If there is a black man that can get acceptance into other communities, it would be me. And there is a level that, trust me, we don't want. I've spied on them before, and you don't want to be a part of a lot of these other, but especially the European communities. Now, sometimes too much acceptance by someone means that you failed morally speaking, because the dishonest don't trust the honest, and the crooked don't trust the righteous. So if somebody known for crookedness and unrighteousness begins to accept you, that means that they've seen wickedness in you. There are some nations to which we can move and be treated well, like Cambodia, Malaysia, Indonesia, Ghana, South Africa, maybe Laos as well. Even people who have issues with Africans generally accept African Americans on an individual basis in a lot of places. But outside of these areas in which either black people are treating each other badly or others are treating us badly or some combination, we can't expect to be treated fairly, let alone be accepted into their societies. Ain't gonna happen. So we can't leave our community as is, and we can't leave it for others' community. The trick is to realize first that our community is not one community. We're multiple black communities in one nation, if we're honest. There are hoods, there are country shanty towns, there are black suburbs like Cascade, Stonecrest, and PG County in Maryland. But as I said previously in another video, we have to leave idness behind. Whether it's the stereotypical thug that's proud of it, or an elitist who thinks that the white community is some standard and doesn't know or doesn't care that they have their own dysfunctions, which is why they can bring up kids who turn into narcissists and psychopaths that could easily shoot up schools or steal entire countries. We may also not benefit from guys that are exaggeratedly bookish, having no practical skill or knowledge either. All of these are extremes. Maybe we can't help them and they can't help us, but how it's like this. The idness niggas, the idness savages are rare, but the exaggeratedly bookish guys are probably even rarer. And one of them has an easier time going towards the middle of the spectrum. We can build a new type of community within Black America, or we can build a new Black America. And we can't bring with us the idness of either type, the low down or the elitist, because they prove that they would not act in our best interest. One will drag us to the penitentiaries if we continue to give them legitimacy like we've done. The other will have us back in churches that preach our inferiority and white supremacy, and maybe even on plantation churches, this time with better access to skin bleach than we had the last time we were in chains, but they'll have us back in chains. Neither one helps. So there's an issue staring us in the face, whichever one of these two options we choose: build a new Black America or build a different type of community within Black America, whichever one. And I'm all for repatriation. Don't get me wrong. I'm for us going. We just can't all go to the same place, but I'm all for us repatriating and maybe even building new Black communities, not necessarily just in America, but in different places. I'm all for that. The Lebanese have done it. And the Indians have done it. These are nationalities you find everywhere. The Chinese are doing it. They ain't just in Africa. So the issue that is staring us in the face, no matter where we go, though, is in women's mate selection. And this is where Obsidian is correct. I would like to know what BGS feels more. I'd like to know more of what he knows about Black women's mate selection. I'm interested in knowing. But BGS, Obsidian has a correct. I want to know what BGS says because he knows history. But Obsidian is right in that it's unhelpful, and it is their mate selection. It's not ours. That's the problem. You see, their mate selection makes it genetically unprofitable and even unhealthy to be a productive guy in many of our zip codes. Nipsey Hussle had a girlfriend and a baby, so he didn't die out genetically, but he still was chosen because Lauren London wanted thugs, and she confessed to this in a King magazine interview back in the day. She brought to Nipsey Hussle Lil Wayne's baby. And Lil Wayne looks like he's been doing drugs for 50 years, and he's only in his 30s, I think. So even a guy like Nipsey Hussle, who's not necessarily a savage, has to, he used to gangbang and had street cred. He still had to settle for being a stepdad before he became a dad, in a sense being almost genetically cheated because she had a baby, came to him, and he had no babies, and he still took her because he decided to go positive and give back. This is before he got shot. Now, if he had been just a regular Pablo Escobar, no positivity, just straight drug lord stuff, Lauren London probably wouldn't have brought this baby. Lauren London probably would have gone to him before she went for Lil Wayne. But all of this is before he got shot, and he got shot by a nigger. He got shot by a savage. He got shot by an idness, a low-life idness savage who was proud to be savage from beforehand. I mean, his stage name was something referring to excrement. How many kids did he have? What's even worse is that in our communities, the women describe sex appeal when they're young as being moral character traits, only to choose the opposite and confuse many men. So frankly, most ADOS Black women cannot be wives to the men we need in the communities to build whatever type of community or a new Black America or a new Black American diaspora abroad. Whatever the case is, the men that we need to build them up, both the blue collar and the white collar. The fact is, ADOS Black women generally aren't going for these dudes, because the lack of blood on a man's hands is oftentimes taken and confused for weakness. Now, the women who can be wives to such men already are, and they certainly exist. I'm not saying that there are no ADOS women that want responsible, sensible men. They may have their type, but they still want responsible, sensible men. This makes them responsible and sensible. These women exist, but see, they're not available for long. So if a man is going to build, then to whom is he supposed to pass on what he built? There's no reason to pass it on to other men's kids, especially the kids of the men that are having the majority of the kids in the neighborhood now. You see, the issue we have in the community is that everybody ain't an ignorant savage, but the ignorant savages are having the most kids. And there's no reason for me to build something and I can't have kids, but I build it and I pass it on to the kids of the ignorant savages. Even though a lot of them aren't going to grow up to be ignorant, only a few will. But that few that grow up to be ignorant like their fathers are going to be the ones that have the next generation. The problem is that we do have our women funneling all of the DNA through the worst of our men. We got too many of our women doing it. It ain't got to be all of them. The fact is, we have a critical mass of them. And there's no reason for the rest of the men to build anything. The ones that are in the middle of the spectrum, the ones that are Pookie and Ray Ray, but they're not idness, there's no reason for them to build unless the women think that they're idness or the women don't care that they're not. And this is exactly what African-American women who do like idness guys are expecting the men they never wanted to do for their kids by the idness men they did. Build, accept all the responsibility, none of the benefits, including busting splendiferous nuts in Big Booty Brenda. It does come down to sex in many cases, as well as respect and everything else. This still stares us in the face in the end. We can't run to other communities. This is true. Ask the Indians that have lived in Africa for generations and don't know India anymore. Black Africans who are always there can't expect equal treatment from them. What do you think whites will do if we try to move into their communities? But we can't build and stay anywhere where spear chuckers like Eric Holder are an influence, especially since most people in any zip code aren't like him. So why are they looking up to him? Why does he have any influence? No matter the zip code's income average. The issue isn't that many people are ignorant in these areas. The issue is that the ignorances have the sway even in nicer black areas because they also aren't shunned, especially by the women, no matter what they do. And guys who aren't ignorant are assumed to be the opposite extreme, wimps and pushovers. And I know because they're looked up to by women in neighborhoods like where I grew up, which was a nice one, still is. Because these idness were seen as being authentic and real niggas despite being of no value to the race in any zip code. I recall one who sold drugs in my neighborhood and he didn't sell them in the neighborhood, he sold them elsewhere, but he lived in my neighborhood, he grew up in my neighborhood, nice area. He sold drugs and he bought the house next to his parents, and there were stories about him and his girlfriends. As far as I know, he's still locked up, but I could be wrong. And also ask LAR Movement about the time he spent in Southern University in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. The inmates were called from the parish jail a few blocks away to talk to female college students. He mentioned this so that when they got out, they already had somebody. Now, the reason they kept doing this is because it kept working. Bottom line, the guys who describe themselves as being out of the community might not be able to just leave, but they are right that they have no incentive to stay and build, as Cynthia G says she wants them to do. In the end, these guys challenged to build are in fact expected to still do more in exchange for less from the women around them. And this still reinforces to these men that at a reptilian level, these women have determined that these men are genetically inferior, and it's because of trouble into which they didn't get in the eyes of white folks in the legal system that they're genetically inferior, less manly. There are no reasons for the most constructive of any men to be loyal to a community like this. If they want to have kids to which they can pass anything, they must marry non-ADOS women. And we know those women can't marry any ADOS man and remain in the community. So, you see, the African-American Muslims faced a similar issue. There were African-American women in the Muslim communities in the U.S. And like the men, they brought in some ignorant behaviors. But as what usually happens, the worst women would bring their crap to the best and most patient guys. So a lot of these men divorced these women and they went to Morocco. Morocco became a popular place to go. Then other guys who had never been married started following them because that's the closest Muslim nation to the USA geographically, with the exception of Suriname in South America. They married women who they thought spoke Arabic and were largely resistant to westernization because they weren't marrying the westernized women from Morocco. They were passing them up. The African American women saw these Moroccan women back in the communities in the U.S., and there began to be instances of them even beating these women, although they were rare. But what was not rare was that they did not welcome these women. African American ADOS women were not welcoming these Moroccan wives of ADOS men. So some men began to say that our solutions weren't in between the legs of Moroccan women, but actually they were in the end. I married one later on. And the reason we're not together are legal reasons now. We weren't incompatible. It was legal problems. In all honesty, she treated me better than I had been treated by almost any one of our own, with one exception. Truth be told. She was a widow. She had kids, but she didn't see me as only good because she had kids. That wasn't the way that worked. I can honestly say that had we met beforehand and she did not know that I was an American, I could have told her I was from Belize. I can honestly say that had we met before she met her husband, I could have been her husband, her first husband. So I found out what it was like to be equal, treated equally by an attractive black woman. That's when I found out I had to leave the U.S. So in the end, the solution actually wound up being, for many guys, in between the thighs of Moroccan wives. The kids came up and they performed better academically. They fought less, and they were usually bilingual, at least speaking both English and Arabic better than either parent. They speak English better than the African American parent and Arabic better than the Moroccan parent, because Moroccans don't speak Arabic that well. In the end, one thing I never heard of was a Moroccan wife cheating on her husband. I'd heard of African American women being faithful and cheating, and I'd heard of this with the men, but I never heard of a Moroccan wife cheating. And of the couples I know, none have divorced. I'm the only African American I know that married a Moroccan and then divorced, and that was for legal reasons. Usually when you bring a non-Western woman to the U.S., she changes, and this is a known phenomena, leading to divorce and alimony and child support from a woman you didn't expect to drag you through this. However, I know of only, I know that the Moroccan women usually did not do this even after they came to the U.S. So when the African American woman complained about it, my answer was, well, why don't you marry a Moroccan man instead of complaining about African American men? I thought it was due to hypergamy and the U.S. passport being stronger. Nope, it turned out that Moroccan men who aren't black or don't know they're black won't usually marry an African American woman. They might marry a black woman, but not African American, because one, usually they don't want to make their children darker than themselves, but that's about half the time only. And two, most of them don't trust or expect much from African American women to begin with. It won't work. So some men and women would say, well, why do you have to be selected by women to build something for the community? And that's a good question, but the answer should be self-evident. For myself, if I'm not selected, then I only need to build for myself, and that does not require as much to build. But if I can't have my own children, then why build for others' children? That is a question with which I can answer the first question. And if I can't have my own children, and I'm not talking about just me, I've got mine, but a lot of other brothers that because they're responsible, they're not picked. If they can't have their own children, and I mean have their own children with a woman before she has other men's children. If they cannot have their own children and have their children be their wives' first child, then why are they required to build for other people's kids? Especially the children of the men who were not required to build in order to have their own children. You see, what's really going on is that question being asked is really only being asked to shame such men into thinking that it's perfectly okay and even manly for them to have to build, to not get what other men got without having to build. We can't go to other communities except temporarily to trade and for business, but we will have to build an improved place in our own communities or new communities. And there won't be enough ADOS women to marry and keep it going without marrying other women of color. I don't suggest marrying white women. They're dangerous. I know that. I'd bet money on it. But we would have to understand this, that when it comes to building, the men that you're looking at to build are going to have to marry non-ADOS women. They can marry black women that ain't ADOS, or they can marry other women of color. But what must be understood, black women, is that it will have to happen. They can't marry a lot of you because you ain't going to go for them. And the only way that that can change is for ADOS women to change their mate selection preferences or disobey them. And we can't expect or force women to do either one. And we don't think that we should have to expect or force women to do either one. We should not have to try to shame them. We're allowed to address it, but we shouldn't expect the women to force themselves to go against what they think is their nature. So what this means, sisters, is that a lot of you who can't tell the difference between a normal nice guy and an outright wimp, you got a problem, and you're going to continue sharing the same few men. And as you share these same few men, you're going to have to accept the consequences, and you're going to have to accept that some of these guys, if they do come back to build, they're going to be married to non-ADOS women, and they're going to be passing on what they've built to children that have a mother from somewhere else. And you're just going to have to accept that, because we don't have the right to tell you what to like. You're right, we don't. So we're just going to have to go ahead and bring in women from elsewhere. And you're going to have to deal with it. Because BGS is right. You can't just leave the Communitah. And I realize we can't just leave it. We can build something different in it, or a new one, but we can't just leave the Communitah. I get it, especially to go into the white community. That's not going to happen. That's very true. But we can bring, and actually we would be forced to bring in women, preferably of other colors, but forced to bring in women from elsewhere with whom to raise our kids. Because no, we who build should not have to accept having to be stepfathers to the children of the men who didn't have to build to get the same draws. Yes, most of your value is in between your legs. It's not your only value as women, but that is a lot of your value. And if you're going to wait until you've been stretched out by some other guy's kids to give a responsible man a shot, you're saying to these men, you're inferior. And that's why we're giving you extra work in exchange for less. That's the real truth of the matter. I hope that this has been a benefit. Assalamu alaikum.